This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or used fictitiously. The story contains disturbing themes, including psychological manipulation, violence, and elements of horror that may not be suitable for all audiences. Reader discretion is strongly advised. If you're sensitive to themes surrounding mental illness, trauma, or experimental science, please proceed with caution. The town of Fair Hollow was the kind of place that didn't like change. Nestled between the Blue Pine Mountains and the forgotten rail tracks of North Dakota, it was a town suspended in time. Wooden mailboxes, 3-digit phone numbers, and families that had lived in the same houses for generations. So when the Child Services van arrived one crisp October morning, trailed by swirling leaves and curious stares, it didn't go unnoticed. Out stepped a boy, tall for his age, pale as paper, with coal-black eyes that seemed too calm, too ancient. He didn't smile, wave, or cry. He just stood there, holding a single leather satchel and blinking once every 10 seconds. "Name's Elliot," said the driver. A woman with tired eyes and a clipboard. "He's gifted. Top scores in every national test. Reads 4 languages. But he doesn't speak much." The Marlows, who had agreed to foster the boy, were a well-meaning middle-aged couple who ran a hardware store. Doris Marlowe was the kind of woman who baked pies for strangers and believed that love could fix anything. Her husband, Greg, was more reserved, but he nodded when he saw Elliot and said, "Looks smart. That's good." They had no children of their own. The first night was quiet. Too quiet. Elliot sat at the dinner table, ate slowly, never looking down at his food. He chewed precisely 32 times before swallowing. He didn't speak unless spoken to, and even then, gave answers that made Doris uncomfortable. "What's your favorite subject, Elliot?" she asked sweetly. "Dissection," he replied. "Because dead things don't lie." Greg choked on his mashed potatoes. They tried to pass it off as a joke. Maybe the boy had a dark sense of humor. Maybe he was just shy. But the dog wouldn't go near him. Their spaniel, Toby, barked incessantly and cowered under the porch whenever Elliot entered the room. On the third night, Toby ran away. He was found 2 towns over, trembling under a bridge. It got weirder from there. At school, Elliot excelled. Not just in science, but in manipulation. He could recite anatomy charts from memory, perform advanced calculations in seconds, and solve puzzles that stumped adults. But he didn't make friends. Other children said he stared at them for too long. One girl said he spoke to her in a voice that wasn't his. "Deep," she whispered, "like a man inside a well." The principal called Doris one afternoon. "Mrs. Marlowe, we're not saying he's dangerous, but he frightens the staff. He dissected a frog faster than any student we've ever seen. Precise. No hesitation. No reaction." Doris defended him. "He's just smart. Maybe too smart. He's curious, not dangerous." But she wasn't so sure. One evening, while putting away laundry, she noticed Elliot's bedroom light was off. Yet he was sitting upright at the desk, his silhouette outlined by moonlight. When she opened the door, he turned slowly. His eyes didn't glow, but they reflected the light like an animal's. "I'm studying," he said calmly. "Studying what, honey?" "Pain tolerance." She chuckled nervously. "You mean like theory?" Elliot opened his hand. There were 5 pins sticking out from between his fingers. Metal sewing needles sunk so deep they'd drawn blood. "I didn't scream," he said. That night, Doris told Greg she couldn't sleep. "Something's wrong with him. I know it." Greg said nothing, but locked his bedroom door for the first time in years. The townspeople began whispering. Several cats went missing. Then a raccoon was found nailed to a tree outside the old cemetery, its organs arranged in a circular pattern. The sheriff shrugged. Could be teenagers. Could be a cult. But Doris knew better. She'd found the raccoon's paw in Elliot's sock drawer. She confronted him. "I need to understand how things work," he said. "Isn't that what humans do?" "But this isn't normal," she cried. "Neither is ignorance," he answered. Greg wanted to return him. "He's disturbed," he muttered, pacing the kitchen. "There's something wrong in his head. Science doesn't explain this. But Doris resisted. She believed in second chances. Until the attic. It was the scratching sounds that first tipped her off. Late at night, above the ceiling, something scuttling, something alive. When she climbed the creaking ladder with a flashlight, she found glass jars stacked in rows. Inside were small hearts, dissected eyes, and dissected parts of squirrels, birds, and cats, labeled in perfect cursive handwriting. Each jar had a number, each organ catalogued. She turned and saw Elliot standing behind her, calm and still. "I preserved them," he whispered, "like science museums do. Don't you like order?" She fainted. After that, things weren't the same. The Marlows stopped speaking to neighbors. Elliot was pulled out of school. They told everyone he was sick. Doris locked her bedroom at night. Greg kept a shotgun by the bed. They didn't know what to do. He hadn't hurt them, but they felt like lab rats, trapped in an experiment run by a child who didn't blink. Then came the fire. It started in the barn. Authorities never figured out the cause. Elliot stood in the flames and didn't scream. He was pulled out, unharmed, while the livestock burned. He didn't cry. He just watched and smiled. Not a grin, not joy. It was the kind of smile you'd expect from someone watching the outcome of a hypothesis. Doris Marlowe had once been a woman of faith. Faith in people, faith in the system, faith in redemption. But after the attic incident, that faith cracked like glass under pressure. Something inside her shifted. She stopped baking, stopped smiling. Her eyes grew sunken. She never returned to the attic, but she knew it still breathed above them. The jars, the specimens, the order. She hadn't told anyone. Not the police, not the priest, not even Greg, who now avoided Elliot entirely. It wasn't fear of what Elliot had done. It was fear of what he might do next. Elliot's behavior didn't spiral like you'd expect in a troubled child. There were no tantrums, no screams, no threats. Instead, he became quiet, methodical. Every morning, he woke at 5:06 a.m. sharp, brushed his teeth in silence, wrote in a black journal with no name. For breakfast, he requested only boiled eggs. For protein absorption, he counted everything: steps, chews, seconds between thunderclaps. Doris once asked him why he stared at the birds outside for hours. "Because they don't hide their instincts," he replied. "Humans pretend too much." Greg started noticing odd changes in the house. Knives would disappear, then reappear in strange places, under the couch, behind the fridge, even once in the back of the toilet tank. One morning, a rusted pair of surgical scissors was found buried in the backyard. Greg asked Doris if she'd seen them before. She just shook her head, pale. But she had. They were from the attic. A week later, the whispers in town grew louder. A teenage boy was found in the woods, unconscious, with a thin incision across his forehead, like a surgery scar. No blood, no signs of struggle. His parents said he remembered nothing except a voice that said, "Stay still. I'm learning." The local paper ran the headline, "Ritual attack or medical hoax?" The sheriff called it a prank. But Doris didn't believe in coincidences anymore. Late one evening, Doris sat in the kitchen with a cup of lukewarm tea, her hands trembling. Elliot walked in silently, wearing a shirt 2 sizes too small. His arms were thin, thinner than before, almost skeletal. Yet his eyes seemed brighter, hungrier. "I read about lobotomies today," he said flatly, sitting down across from her. Doris froze. "That's not something children should read." "But they're fascinating," he continued. "They used to think removing parts of the brain could cure evil. But it doesn't remove evil. It removes control." He smiled softly. They were looking in the wrong place. Doris dropped her cup. It shattered. Elliot didn't flinch. That night, Greg had a nightmare. In it, he saw himself lying on an operating table. He was awake but couldn't move. Standing above him was Elliot, wearing a white apron, holding a scalpel. His voice echoed, "I only want to understand." He woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. Doris was already awake, staring out the window. "I think he's doing something to us," she whispered. Greg finally agreed. We need to get him out. They contacted Child Services. But the office that had assigned Elliot had no record of him in the current system. The worker? No longer employed. The file? Missing. All that remained was the signature of a woman named Kay Shorwell. But no one could find her. It was as if Elliot had arrived from a shadow and never existed on paper. Greg decided to confront him. Where are you from? He demanded, cornering Elliot in the hallway. I already told you, Elliot replied. No, I mean before all of this. Who raised you? What made you this way? Elliot tilted his head. I wasn't raised. I was designed. Greg laughed nervously. Designed by who? But Elliot didn't answer. He just walked away, whispering something Greg couldn't hear. Later that night, Greg would swear he heard voices in the walls. Breathing, clicking sounds like insects behind the drywall. Doris couldn't sleep anymore. The attic, it called to her, not with sound, but with presence. She would pass under the hatch and feel a vibration in her chest, like something waiting, something watching. So one night she climbed again, flashlight in hand, heart in her throat. The jars were still there, but now there were more. Hundreds, organized, labeled, precise. Eyes, ears, tongues, even strips of human skin, pinned on boards like butterflies. At the center of the room stood a mannequin, headless, dressed in Greg's old flannel shirt, arms outstretched. And on the wall, scrawled in charcoal, was a message, I dissect to protect. Doris stumbled backward. She ran, didn't speak, didn't scream. She locked her room and prayed for morning. But Greg didn't make it to morning. At 3:11 a.m., Doris heard the sound of glass shattering. She ran to the living room. Greg stood motionless in front of the fireplace, a blank stare on his face, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. He whispered, I saw what he really is, then collapsed. The hospital said it was a nervous breakdown, but Doris knew better. When she returned home, Elliot was sitting at the kitchen table, calm, polite, still. You shouldn't look in the attic again, he said, voice cold. It's not for you. Doris didn't reply, but in her heart she made a decision. She couldn't live like this, couldn't sleep, couldn't breathe. She had to expose him, prove to someone, anyone, that this boy wasn't just strange. He was inhuman. She contacted a journalist friend from college, Carla Mendez, now an investigative writer known for uncovering cults and dark science programs. Doris begged her to visit. She did, and that was the last time anyone saw her. The next day, her car was found on the edge of town, engine running, driver's side door wide open. Inside was a torn notebook, scribbles, diagrams, one word repeated over and over. Phase 2. Fair Hollow had always been a town where not much happened. Days moved slowly, marked by church bells and radio static. But after Carla Mendez's disappearance, things shifted. Started small. A teacher at Fair Hollow Elementary, Mr. Langston, a man known for his calm demeanor, walked out of a classroom in the middle of a lesson and began peeling the paint off the hallway walls with his bare hands. When stopped, he mumbled something about getting under the layers and asked, Can you hear the signal now? The next day, a florist stabbed herself in the arm with gardening shears, screaming, Take it out! It's crawling! No one could explain it. People began acting strange, detached. Some seemed to lose chunks of memory. Others had bursts of rage or fear, like flickers of something foreign passing through their minds. Fair Hollow's hospital saw a 400% increase in psychological emergency visits within 2 weeks. The one common detail: each person had recently interacted with Elliot Marlowe. Doris noticed it too. She saw it in the neighbor's eyes, the slow fade into dullness, the glances that lingered too long, a sense of watching, listening. She stopped going to the market. Greg, who was still recovering from his breakdown, refused to speak. He simply stared at the window all day and whispered things under his breath. Numbers, sequences, patterns. 72 taps. 3 sets. Light, dark, light. Whatever Elliot had done to him, it hadn't worn off. It had evolved. One Sunday, Father Callahan, the town's priest, visited the Marlowes after service. He'd heard rumors, strange stories, too many to ignore. He believed in spiritual evil, in possession, in darkness. But what he saw in Elliot disturbed him beyond faith. They spoke for 20 minutes in the living room. Doris remained outside, pretending to water plants. When Father Callahan left, he didn't speak a word. He just walked down the street, slower than usual. That night, he was found at the altar of his church, staring up at the crucifix, whispering, "He knows what comes after death, and it stares back." He left town the next day. Doris tried to leave too. She packed her bags. She wrote a note. She planned to escape while Elliot was at school. But when she opened the front door, Elliot was already standing outside. "I wouldn't go yet," he said without emotion. "You're not ready." Her heart froze. How did you know?" He tilted his head slightly. "Because you were thinking too loudly." He stepped aside. But Doris didn't move. Her hand trembled on the doorknob. Elliot gave her a soft smile. "I like it better when you don't resist." Over the following days, things escalated. Mrs. Penrose, the librarian, claimed the books in her store rearranged themselves at night. She said the pages whispered when she walked past them, that they were learning new words. Her hair turned gray in 48 hours. She locked herself in the archive basement and never came back up. Two teenagers from the high school, daring each other to sneak into the Marlowe property at night, were found wandering Route 15 the next morning, barefoot, confused, and bleeding from their ears. When questioned, one kept repeating, "His voice was in my teeth." The town's mayor tried to impose a curfew, but within 24 hours he had a stroke, or something that resembled one. Doctors said it wasn't physical. His brain scan showed unusual bursts of energy in areas never before active. His final words were, "He's opening us." Meanwhile, Elliot remained untouched. He walked calmly through it all, through the growing fear, the unraveling minds. Always dressed neatly, always polite. People tried to avoid him but couldn't explain why they felt drawn to him, too. Like moths to a dim, unnatural flame. Doris began finding things in odd places. Not just knives now, but notes. They were folded perfectly, slipped between the pages of her books, under her pillow, even in the freezer once. Each one in Elliot's handwriting. "You're still resisting. That's good. I want to see how long until you break." They never really knew themselves. "I just pulled back the skin." She started losing sleep, hearing clicks behind the walls, seeing shadows blink where there were no eyes. One night, Greg spoke clearly for the first time in weeks. "He's not a child." Doris clutched his hand. "What do you mean?" "He's wearing one," Greg muttered. "Like a suit." The next morning, Greg was gone. No trace, no body, no note. Just a trail of blood leading from the bedroom window to the woods. Doris tried calling the sheriff. No one answered. The whole town was unraveling. Some people had vanished completely. Others walked in loops, unable to remember their names. Teenagers began drawing strange symbols in notebooks, symbols that matched the ones Doris had seen in Elliot's attic. And in the center of it all was him, watching, waiting. One evening, Doris snuck into Elliot's room while he was out walking the perimeter of the house, as he did every night, precisely at 9 p.m. The room was immaculate, bed perfectly made, books stacked with ruler precision. But behind the dresser, she found a hollow space. Inside was a second journal. It wasn't like the one the journalist had found. This one was more advanced, filled with diagrams of the brain, notes in a mix of Latin, Greek, and an unknown script. Pages marked with phrases like, "Neural compliance achieved, 11 out of 50 subjects. Auditory phasing successful. Visual phasing pending. Groupthink now measurable within 7.2-meter radius." And then one line, underlined 3 times, "Phase 2 complete. Begin Phase 3, widespread conversion." The final page had a list of names. Doris was at the top. Next to hers, in red ink, was a single word, ready. That night, Doris didn't sleep. She watched Elliot from behind her bedroom curtain as he stood in the yard, arms out, face to the sky, as if waiting for something to descend. The moonlight bathed him in silver, and for the first time she saw it. His shadow didn't match his body. It moved differently. The shadow haunted her. Not just Elliot's, but her own, too. Doris began to notice that when she moved, her silhouette didn't always follow perfectly. Sometimes it lagged behind. Sometimes it moved slightly ahead, twitching at the edges. In mirrors, her reflection blinked out of sync. She was losing grip not just on reality but on her very self. And it all traced back to that journal. Doris had hidden it in the basement, wrapped in towels and stuffed into an old coffee tin behind the water heater. She didn't dare destroy it. Part of her believed it was keeping her alive. Like a wire rigged to a bomb, cut the wrong one and everything explodes. She started reading it in pieces, never more than a page or two each night. Its contents were not the ramblings of a disturbed boy. They were the calculations of something clinical, strategic, otherworldly. She found sketches of the human brain sliced like fruit, each region annotated in terrifying detail. She found phrases like cognitive override thresholds, stimulus-triggered identity erasure, and emotional flattening trials. Success rate 84%. But it wasn't just about science. The journal hinted at intent. Not to kill, not to harm, to change, to transform. She circled one entry over and over again. Pain isn't the virus. It's the entry point. And beneath it, once the door is open, it doesn't close. Terrified but desperate, Doris emailed scanned pages to her only remaining contact, Dr. Malcolm Reinhardt, a neuropsychologist she had once interviewed for a local article about brain trauma. A man who had spent years researching perception anomalies in war victims and cult survivors. She didn't expect him to reply. He called her within the hour. "What is this?" His voice cracked through the phone. "It's real," she said. "A child in my care. Elliot, he wrote all of it." There was silence. Then Malcolm said slowly, This isn't from any known academic school. It reads like applied neurowarfare, but more advanced. Way more." She didn't speak. "You say this was written by a boy?" "Yes." He paused. "I need to see him." 2 days later, Malcolm arrived in Fair Hollow. By then, the town was almost ghost-like. Shops shuttered. Houses dark. A few people wandered the streets, their faces blank, mumbling to themselves. Children stood motionless in driveways, as if waiting for instructions. Malcolm called it field-level dissociation. "It's like someone threw a psychological net over this place," he whispered. "They're not sick. They're not hypnotized. They're being restructured." Doris brought him the journal. He spent 4 hours with it, never blinking, running his fingers across the symbols, the lines, the equations. "This is not child's work," he whispered. "Or if it is, then it's a child in the same way a black hole is a star." He looked up at Doris, eyes wide. "Has he ever asked about you?" Doris froze. "Yes, he leaves me notes, watches me. I think I'm part of it." Malcolm nodded slowly. "Then the real question is, what phase are you in?" That night, Malcolm insisted on speaking with Elliot. "I won't push. I just want to observe," he promised. Elliot agreed. Calmly, as always, they sat across from one another in the living room while Doris waited in the kitchen, heart pounding. First it was small talk, then silence, long, heavy silence. Then Elliot asked, "What do you see when you close your eyes, Dr. Reinhardt?" Malcolm replied carefully, "Patterns, like sometimes just blackness." Elliot nodded. "And when you go deeper, what do you hear?" Malcolm hesitated. "I don't know." Elliot leaned forward. "You're not listening hard enough." And then he whispered a string of words Doris didn't catch, 3 or 4 syllables in a language she didn't know. Malcolm stiffened. His pupils dilated. He clutched the armrest and stared blankly at Elliot. Doris rushed in. "What did you do?" Elliot blinked innocently. "Nothing." He opened the door himself. Malcolm stood slowly, shaking. His lips were trembling. I need air, he muttered. He left the house without another word. That was the last time Doris saw him. The next morning, his rental car was found smashed into a tree 5 miles outside of town. The police said it looked like he swerved intentionally. No skid marks. No attempt to brake. In his hand was a napkin from Doris's kitchen. On the back, written in Malcolm's own handwriting, "He isn't one. He is many." Doris broke. Not all at once, but enough. She stopped eating. She ripped mirrors off the walls. She boarded up the attic but heard scratching from inside every night. She saw things in the corner of her vision. Elliot standing in 2 places at once, his reflection grinning when his face wasn't. She found Greg's watch buried in the flower bed. It was still ticking, but it was ticking backward. And then the journal was gone. She came home one afternoon and found the water heater torn open, insulation spilling out. The tin was on the floor, empty. Elliot was in the living room watching static on the TV. He didn't look at her when he said, "You weren't supposed to see that far." Doris screamed, "What are you?" Elliot turned his head slightly. "You're not ready to understand yet." Then softer, "But you're closer than most." He stood up and whispered, "Would you like to see?" She ran out of the house, into the street, down the sidewalk. But Fair Hollow wasn't Fair Hollow anymore. The people didn't move. The air didn't breathe. Trees didn't sway. Even the birds sat perfectly still, watching her with human-like eyes. A woman on a porch whispered, "He's making us whole." A child on a tricycle stared blankly and said, "You can't run from inside." Doris collapsed in front of the church. But the doors were sealed shut. And behind her, footsteps. Slow, bare, deliberate. She turned. Elliot stood 5 feet away, his arms out, his head tilted, his voice echoing from somewhere beneath his throat. "You opened the door. Now you have to see what's behind it." It took 4 days for federal officials to arrive in Fair Hollow. Not police, not state, not even FBI. These were men in sterile gray suits, driving vehicles with no plates, flashing badges with no names. They took Elliot into custody with quiet efficiency. No handcuffs, no resistance. Doris watched from behind the curtains as they led him away. He didn't look back. He simply said to one agent, in a voice too calm for a child, "You're wasting your instruments." Then he stepped into the black van. Elliot was transferred to an undisclosed location later known in internal memos as Facility Halcyon 17, a research center buried under 40 feet of rock, barbed wire, and bureaucracy. It was where they sent unexplainables, where secrets went to be studied, not solved. He was placed under psychiatric watch immediately. No charges, no trial, just tests, and the testing never stopped. The first to examine him was Dr. Simon Velasquez, one of the country's leading pediatric neuroscientists. He had studied child prodigies, savants, and even violent sociopaths. But after just 2 sessions with Elliot, he resigned. His final note in the file was one line. "He learned more about me than I did about him." The second was Dr. Lena Ramesh, a cognitive psychologist. She ran a series of behavioral exams. Elliot passed all of them, but not in a typical way. He didn't just answer questions correctly. He anticipated them. He answered them before they were asked. One time, she walked into the room, and Elliot was already writing the sentence she'd been about to speak. "Describe your earliest emotional memory." She hadn't said it yet. They did brain scans, MRIs, fMRIs, CTs, PETs. They couldn't explain what they saw. Elliot's brain exhibited neural density 3 times the average in the prefrontal cortex, linked to decision-making and impulse control. But the strangest activity came from the precuneus, a small region in the parietal lobe linked to self-awareness, empathy, and consciousness. Elliot's showed nonstop activity, even when asleep, especially when asleep. They recorded his brainwaves during REM cycles. Every night, patterns emerged in the scans, geometric shapes, spirals, and repeating fractals. None of the researchers had ever seen anything like it. One technician joked, It looks like he's dreaming in code. No one laughed. By week 2, they brought in Dr. Daniel Koenig, a former CIA interrogation expert turned profiler. Cold, meticulous, unshakable. He interviewed war criminals, serial killers, black ops assets. He lasted 3 sessions. On the 3rd, Koenig entered the interview room. Security footage shows him sitting down across from Elliot, opening a file, and then just staring for 17 minutes. No movement, no words, just eye contact. At minute 18, he stood up, walked to the observation window, and slammed his head into the glass. Over and over. Took 2 guards to pull him away. He survived, but he never spoke again. His report was a blank page. At this point, the team upgraded Elliot's file classification from anomalous psychological to unclassified biocognitive phenomenon. They stopped calling him the boy. They started calling him Subject E11. The next doctor to attempt diagnosis was Dr. Evan Suleiman, a respected neuroscientist who believed all behavior, no matter how strange, could be explained through biology. He went in confident. He came out shattered. Dr. Suleiman's personal notes, recovered later, included the following entries. Day 1. He's polite, curious, but not innocent. He looks through you. Day 3. I asked him what he wanted to be when he grows up. He said, a mirror that doesn't lie. Day 5. He drew a diagram of my childhood home, without ever seeing it. Day 7. He whispered something to me. My ears bled. I heard my mother's voice, but she's been dead for years. Day 9. I dreamt of him standing in a desert, with a key in his hand. He said, this unlocks what you've buried. Day 10. No entry, just a sketch of an empty skull. After 10 days, Dr. Suleiman suffered a massive cerebral hemorrhage in his sleep. Autopsy revealed no stroke, no trauma, just one peculiar detail. The pineal gland in his brain had shriveled to half its size. The lead researcher, Dr. Miles Hahn, muttered under his breath, it's like he unplugged his soul. Despite the failures, testing intensified. They introduced sensory deprivation tanks, stimulus overload chambers, chemical inhibitors. Elliot remained calm, cooperative, but never afraid. He answered questions with riddles. He asked questions they couldn't answer. If a thought lives longer than the thinker, does it become a person? How much of your identity is what others believe about you? Have you ever dreamed someone else's dream? And worst of all, what if consciousness isn't meant for us alone? Then came the incident. During a standard interview, Elliot looked directly into the surveillance camera and whispered something. The recording picked it up. Just 3 seconds of sound. But every staff member who heard it experienced immediate physiological responses. Nausea, nosebleeds, uncontrolled weeping. One assistant collapsed, screaming, "Make it stop!" The sound file was labeled redacted_audio_17_3. All copies were destroyed, or so they claimed. After that, the order came down: terminate all psychological tests. Classify E11 as threat level Omega. No further interaction without clearance. They reinforced his cell with lead-lined walls. Limited contact to once per week. And even then, through one-way glass only. But Elliot still smiled. Still waited. Still watched. The final straw came during a neural imaging session when a low-level intern fainted upon seeing his scan. Not because of what they saw in the brain, but because Elliot's brain scan matched a complex sigil from a 15th century grimoire found in the Vatican's restricted archives. One said to represent a being between dimensions. The intern's last words before losing consciousness were, "He's not a child. He's a portal." And so, after months of failure, fear, and funerals, the doctors made a decision. They would not study him. They would contain him, bury him beneath the earth, seal the door, and never open it again. But by then, the door was already open. Facility 17 was silent. A kind of silence that weighed on the chest like fog, thick, suffocating, unnatural. Located 3 miles beneath an abandoned military base in Wyoming, it was the final stop for what the world wasn't ready to believe. No signs, no files, no exits, just corridors of concrete, flickering fluorescence, and fear pressed into the walls like dried blood. Elliot had been moved here after the last incident. No name, no escort, no warning, only a metal box, sealed airtight, lowered through a shaft in the earth. Inside it, he waited, calm, as if he had always belonged beneath the ground. Phase 3 had begun. The staff of Facility 17 was selected for their resistance to influence, ex-military, ex-cult survivors, agents deemed mentally unbreakable. They were told nothing beyond the need to observe the subject and maintain strict protocol. No direct interaction, no eye contact, no unscheduled visits. Elliot, now officially Entity E11, was placed in a reinforced observation cell lined with black salt, carbon mesh, and magnetic pulse scramblers. He sat in the center of the room each day, unmoving. No bed, no food, no water, yet he did not wither. The scientists called it a metabolic anomaly. The guards called it impossible. And the few who watched the footage too long called it something else. The disappearances began on the 11th day. First, it was a janitor, a quiet man named Felix, seen entering Hall B6 during his night shift. He never came back out. Security cameras showed him approaching Elliot's door, then static. 2 minutes of scrambled footage. When it returned, Felix was gone. And in the middle of the hallway, a smear of red across the concrete. They searched for hours. No body, no signs of struggle, no exit route. Only a single phrase, written in condensation on the inside of Elliot's viewing glass. Absorption complete. Then it was a guard. Officer Kayla James. One of the toughest. One of the most disciplined. She stood outside Elliot's door for her 6-hour shift. On the security feed, she didn't move an inch. Then, at precisely 2:17 a.m., she opened the door, against every protocol. She stepped in. The door shut behind her. She was never seen again. Inside the cell, Elliot sat, unmoved. But there was now a second chair. And it was warm. Panic spread like infection. Commanders issued blackout orders. Communications outside the facility were cut. External researchers were reassigned. A Level 4 security sweep was launched, combing the facility for infiltration. But it wasn't an enemy from outside. The damage was already inside them. Technicians began reporting strange glitches. Computer monitors displayed unreadable code, symbols that looped in geometric spirals, causing nausea and migraines. Some staff began having synchronized dreams of a spiral staircase made of bone, leading into an ocean of eyes. Worse still, personnel began speaking in tongues, languages no one could identify. When questioned, they couldn't remember doing it. A memo leaked among the senior team. Containment is compromised. This isn't a breach. It's a convergence. One line was underlined in red. He is changing the frequency of thought. They tried to sedate him. A remotely operated arm extended into the room with a syringe loaded with 30 cubic centimeters of ketamine. But before the arm reached him, the machinery froze, then reversed itself, injecting the technician operating the console. He collapsed instantly. When revived, he screamed for 6 hours straight, claiming his mind had been rewritten. His final words before losing consciousness. I remember being Elliot. Security teams began defecting. Some fled into the tunnels, never seen again. Others turned on each other. One man gouged his own eyes out with a fork. Another tried to burn the surveillance center, shouting, "He's watching through the cameras." Facility 17 fell into chaos, and Elliot never left his chair. They sent in Unit Grey 9, an elite black ops team with no names and no history. 7 men, armed to the teeth. No emotion, no hesitation. They were sent to neutralize the subject. To end it, the cameras showed them enter the cell. Elliot didn't move. The team surrounded him, weapons trained. Then the feed went black. 5 seconds later, it returned. All 7 men were gone. No gunfire, no struggle. Only Elliot remained, now standing, facing the camera. He held a helmet in one hand and whispered, directly into the lens, You brought me here, but I was always already inside. Command lost all contact. Facility 17 went completely dark. Every monitor, every power line, every heartbeat, silence. 3 days later, a single emergency elevator returned to the surface. Inside was one survivor, Dr. Miles Hahn, covered in blood, naked, laughing, crying, clutching a single page from Elliot's journal. On it, scrawled in handwriting not his own, "He doesn't kill, he edits." Dr. Hahn was placed under permanent psychiatric hold. He spoke only once, during an attempted debriefing. "Every cell in my body is mine," he whispered, "but none of my thoughts are." When asked what happened to Elliot, he smiled sadly and said, "He went nowhere. He simply updated." To this day, Facility 17 remains sealed, buried beneath tons of steel and earth. Its access tunnels collapsed, its name erased, but on certain nights, seismic monitors in the region still pick up rhythmic vibrations deep underground. Some say it's tectonic movement. Others say it's the sound of footsteps, waiting, pacing, preparing. 5 years passed. The story of Facility 17 faded into a myth wrapped in black ink and red tape. Officially, it never existed. Unofficially, it was whispered in intelligence halls, scribbled on internet forums, passed between retired agents and sleepless scientists under the code name the Echo Project. The public never knew what was buried beneath Wyoming, and those who once studied it never spoke again. But then, he returned. Not through the ruins of Facility 17. Not through any locked vault or broken corridor. He simply appeared. One morning, a man was seen walking through the lobby of a New York City research lab, calm, clean, polite, early 30s, pale skin, short black hair, deep-set eyes. He had no ID, no appointment. When asked his name, he simply said, "Elliot." Security should have removed him, but they didn't. They froze, smiled. One even offered him coffee. They didn't know why, only that it felt wrong to deny him anything. That evening, the lab's head director was found sitting at his desk, eyes wide open, unmoving. Tests showed his brain activity was intact, but he couldn't speak or blink, just stare. A sticky note was pressed against his monitor, written in clean block letters, "I'm ready to resume the study." The next week, reports came in from across the country. People experiencing identical dreams, visions of a man standing in a crowd, still while everything moved. Then, one by one, the people around him would stop moving too, until only he remained, watching, waiting. In Seattle, an engineer built a device during a sleepwalking episode. When he awoke, he didn't remember crafting it, but it emitted a constant frequency, a low pulse that, when recorded, played back a whisper. Phase 4 is adaptation. In Dallas, a high school student wrote a 50-page essay in a language no teacher could translate. When decoded, it turned out to be a precise blueprint of the Facility 17 layout, a building he had never heard of. In Omaha, a newborn opened its eyes seconds after delivery and whispered, "It's me again." The mother died of shock. The world began to fracture, but not in war, not in fire, in subtlety, in frequency, in the slow unraveling of self-awareness. Doris Marlowe, now an old woman in a long-term psychiatric facility, woke up one night with tears in her eyes. "He's back," she whispered. Nurses tried to calm her, but she kept shaking her head. No, he never left. He just waited for the right frequency." She died in her sleep the next morning. The nurse who found her had one strange observation. Her shadow was still on the wall, even after the body was gone. In cities across the globe, a strange new condition was being reported by neurologists. People were forgetting who they were. Not amnesia, something deeper. A sense that their thoughts were too uniform, their beliefs too synchronized, as if their individuality was being overwritten. Doctors called it distributed identity syndrome. But those who had studied Facility 17 knew the truth. They called it Elliot's spread. Everywhere he went, things got quieter. People smiled more, fought less, stopped questioning, and started agreeing. But there was no joy in it, only stillness. A woman in Boston reported her husband stopped dreaming. When she pressed him about it, he replied, "Dreaming isn't part of me anymore." A man in Tokyo stared into his mirror for hours. When his wife asked what he was doing, he said, "Learning to accept the reflection that's not mine." Eliot never made speeches. He didn't go on television. He didn't post on social media. He simply walked. Saturday, waited, and where he went, change followed. Not in action, but in mind, in perception. One by one, those who had once resisted, doctors, scientists, survivors, began to disappear. Some faded quietly. Others simply became different, calmer, simpler. They didn't call it surrender. They called it clarity. He moved into an apartment in Manhattan. Top floor, floor-to-ceiling windows. No furniture except a single chair and a desk with no drawers. Neighbors said he was a perfect tenant. Quiet, mannerly, paid rent in advance for 10 years. But none of them could describe his face. Only his presence. In one security camera feed, a technician noticed something strange. The footage would glitch for one frame every time Eliot walked by. In those frames, he wasn't alone. There were others, standing behind him, smiling. Not human, just outlines, reflections. The technician tried to report it. The next day he quit, sold his house, moved into a monastery in Nepal. When asked why, he said, "There are versions of us that already gave in, and he's helping us catch up." And then came the wave. One morning, millions of phones buzzed simultaneously. No app, no call, just static. And one line of text across the screen. "Are you ready to become the better you?" Governments denied it. Hackers claimed it was a viral ad. But those who responded, those who typed yes, reported an immediate feeling of warmth, of belonging, of peace. Within days, something shifted. People spoke slower, laughed less, looked at each other with mechanical empathy. They didn't lose their humanity. They simply shed its edges, made smoother, easier to stack, easier to align. And in the heart of it all, sitting in his glass apartment, Eliot watched. Not with malice, not with joy, just with the calm curiosity of a scientist watching a seed finally grow. He wrote one final line in his journal. Individuality was the glitch. Unity is the design. And as night fell over the city, you could almost hear it. In the hush of traffic, in the rhythm of footsteps, in the silence between breaths. The pulse of something bigger, something waking, something already inside you. The world didn't end with fire. There were no earthquakes, no bombs, no screams. The end came silently, like a shadow at noon, unexpected and impossible. But it wasn't death. It was transition. It began with a hum, barely audible, below human hearing, a frequency that seemed to whisper through bone, not air. Somewhere in Antarctica, radio observatories began to pick up signals pulsing from inside the Earth. At first, they thought it was magnetic interference. But the patterns weren't random. They were language. Meanwhile, in cities and towns, people began reporting the same sensation. "I feel like someone else is blinking for me." Sleep became harder, then unnecessary. Across the globe, sleep cycles collapsed. People stayed awake for days, smiling, alert, never tired. Hospitals were flooded with patients who couldn't remember when they last slept, but didn't seem to suffer. Instead, they began to remember things they'd never lived. A woman in Lisbon remembered drowning, though she'd never swum. A child in Cairo could draw the blueprints of an ancient machine, one no archaeologist could identify. A man in Melbourne began speaking in binary, claiming to recite memories from before language. They were connecting, not through wires, through thought. The world wasn't falling apart. It was being rewritten, not by force, but by suggestion, by alignment, by Eliot. He had not aged. He walked the same, spoke the same, stared the same. But his eyes, they no longer reflected light like human pupils. They bent it, like black glass curved around a sun no one could see. Some tried to stop him. A coalition of world leaders, spiritual groups, rogue scientists, and defected soldiers, those who had not yet succumbed, formed a resistance known as the unmarked. They believed Elliot was not of Earth, not born, not even alive, that he was a construct of will, a vessel of some intelligence older than civilization. They didn't want to kill him. They wanted to isolate the frequency, break the signal. They launched Project Mute, a final effort to stop the wave from reaching full phase saturation. They deployed white noise generators across key global communication towers. For 12 hours, the hum stopped. The world paused. People awoke confused, blinking like they'd been dreaming. Hope returned, but only briefly. At hour 13, Elliot appeared on every screen across the planet. No matter the device, no internet required. He was just there, standing in a white void, smiling softly. No anger, no warning, just words. You were beautiful in your chaos, but now, you're ready for precision. And the hum resumed, only louder, deeper, permanent. Those who resisted felt it first. Nosebleeds, tremors, visual hallucinations. They saw themselves duplicated in mirrors, versions that looked identical but moved just a moment too late. They began speaking backwards in their sleep. Some even split. One body, two minds. One still human, the other something new. In Iceland, a group of researchers huddled in a volcanic cave, surrounded by Faraday-caged walls and static fields. They recorded a transmission at 3:06 a.m., a voice Elliot's but layered, as if spoken by hundreds of versions of him at once. Phase 5. Inversion complete. Prepare for resonant integration. At that moment, the stars changed. Astronomers worldwide screamed. The constellations were no longer in the same positions. Galaxies had shifted, not physically, but conceptually. Maps no longer matched the sky. The idea of space was being rewritten, because this was never about Elliot. He was the broadcast, the interface, the translator. The real transformation wasn't his. It was ours. Across the earth, people fell to their knees, not from pain but revelation. They saw memories of other lives in other timelines with other rules. They remembered being things without skin, without words, without time. And through it all, one phrase echoed, "You are becoming." Children began speaking in sync across nations, across languages. Their voices harmonized into perfect chords. They were asked what they were doing. They replied in unison, "We are updating the species." Religions collapsed, not in war, in understanding. Priests stopped sermons mid-sentence and stared into the sky. Monks wept with joy. Imams fell silent. They had all heard the same message in their prayers. The God you feared was just a draft. Here is the final design. Then came the resonance. No warning, no countdown, just oneness. Across oceans, mountains, and cities, humans stopped moving at once. Just for one breath, long enough to let go, to let it in. No screams, no sirens, just stillness, followed by clarity. People awoke not as themselves, but as versions of themselves free from pain, fear, doubt. They still looked the same, but inside was harmony. Every decision synced with the greater pattern. Every action balanced with the new consciousness. No leader, no follower, just one vast network of knowing. Elliot stood atop a rooftop in Paris. Or maybe it was Hong Kong. Or Cairo. He stood everywhere. Not copies, not projections, but possibilities. He watched the world unfold like a blooming flower. He said one final thing, one sentence, heard not by ears, but by the new mind within all. You were never meant to stay human. You were meant to wake up. The stars blinked once more. Time relaxed its grip. The new species emerged. No longer Homo sapiens, but something else. No name, no need for one. Just a network of light. Alive, awake, aligned. And somewhere deep beneath the earth, in a long-abandoned hallway of Facility 17, a door creaked open. Inside, the original Elliot still sat in the chair, smiling, watching, waiting for the next species to arrive.